Good visit?
Yeah, it was very eventful. Try to keep her on going all the time, you know me.
Yep.
It's
Yes, I
still,
do.
you had a good trip to New Hampshire?
Yeah, it was not a long one. I mean, it was a couple of days, that's it, but it was fun. The
Good.
kids were off of school, so we had all big plans, and then it snowed the whole day so.
What else is new, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, it hardly snowed at all this winter, but it had to snow,
Of course.
Every time I go up there, it snows.
So I want to say good evening, especially to those who are joining us on the live stream. I'm more and more aware of how we have to be aware. There's a number of people who watch this program regularly, and some are beginning to comment and encourage us. So I want to say hello to them. Hello to those of you who join us either live or later on in the week. We're glad to have you be a part of this. I just want to remind those of you who are watching on the YouTube live stream, at the bottom of the live stream channel, you can go down there and you can ask questions, you can make comments. I can't respond to them live because if I turn on my YouTube channel live now, it'll feed back here. But I do go back and I look to see comments, questions. I especially enjoy it if you identify yourselves. I mean, I know that's not popular because anonymity is key when it comes to Bible and Bible studies, but if you do want to identify yourself, please do it that way. And also, if you'd like to join us for the Zoom conversation, just send me a request and I'll send you the Zoom invitation so you could be right here as a part of our circle. And that would be very exciting too. So, having said that, I'll say again hello to Debbie and to Barbara. Glad to see you here tonight. We have a tendency to grow a little bit as we go into the first 15 minutes, and that's okay with me too. I'm just glad to have those who make it. Here comes somebody now. Who's this?
Alice.
Oh, Alice. Okay, good. Hi, Alice. She's not on voice yet. Hello, Alice.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hello, Alice.
How's everybody this evening?
Yeah.
Okay, Barbara, you have to share. Whatever you're having for dinner, you got to share it.
I had a long day, so I'm just having pineapple and granola.
Ooh.
Wow.
Oh, okay. Okay. That sounds good too.
Wait. Hello, Colette. Colette's coming in.
Great.
Also, I can't see who the other person is that's coming.
Melinda.
Melinda. Oh, good. Good.
Hello.
Hi, Melinda. Hello,
Hi,
Colette.
Melinda.
How are you?
Good. Very good. And you?
Good. Driving.
I was going to
I'm
say,
here.
are you driving? That's,
Yes.
okay. Well, Colette, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good.
I think we see the top of her head.
Yeah.
You're at. Yep.
All right. Well, for those of you who've been coming regularly and follow, you know that we're up against Job. And everybody's...
Oh.
Hey, I know, and everybody moans.
You promised, no?
I know.
What happened? I missed last week. Did I miss the end of Esther?
Yes, you did.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
And today is Purim. It would have been perfect. Oh, well.
That's right. That's right. Purim is today. So,
Yeah.
yes, the closing remark of the commentation that I have says that as far as we know, Purim is the only religious festival in the Jewish broad tradition of traditions that were founded and created by a woman. And I think that's really interesting, especially because of the shocking role that women play in that story, and the fact that it was included in the important books and continues to be told around the world today about this. I always think that the hero of the story begins when, what's her name? Come on. Before Esther the queen, was it Ahasuerus?
No, that's the
Vashti,
king.
Vashti. That Vashti
Yeah.
in some ways is the queen. She's the first domino to fall in terms of starting this whole thing in motion, where a woman said no to a man, and said no to a man in power. And the result was that all the men in the village, like Humpty Dumpty's men that couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together again, were very worried that they could not reconstruct the control they had in that society if a woman ever said no to a man. And in the ripples of her no, she loses her queenship, and then Esther comes to power, and Esther is no pushover either. She risks her life and comes before the king and demands that he make good on his promise to honor her wishes, and then, in the most creative way, gets the king to promise to save her people. Meanwhile, the king's right-hand man, somebody help me out, Haman. Haman has been plotting to murder every Jewish person in the diaspora. And he ends up hanging on the gallows he invented for others. Great story. It's a really, really good story. And what it tells in the end is it tells the story of the struggle of, and I'm going to say this isn't just the struggle of Jewish people. It's the struggle of anyone who is seeking to live out their faith traditions in foreign lands, in lands where their faith is not recognized, and especially in places where their faith is persecuted, where they are thought of as suspect people because of the faith they have. So Esther and Mordecai are shining examples, and I think this is the purpose of the story, shining examples of how people are to live when they are, well, let me just make it very practical. How are you supposed to live as a Christian in a land that does not demonstrate Christian values and persecutes Christian values? And you have to figure out how to live by swimming upstream, and you cannot go along with the culture. You have to stand against the culture. And Mordecai and Esther are examples, shining examples of how to win in those situations. So, all those words I've said. Hi, Judy. How are you?
Hello. Much better. Thank you. Yeah. Coming along.
I'm glad to hear it.
Thank you.
Those are all examples of wonderful truths, but they're also me just stalling so we don't have to start Job. So I don't want to spend really, maybe just tonight, I just want to talk about Job. And the reason I want to talk about Job is, well, it's not this study is not the one that is having to deal with Isaiah and the question of why do bad things happen? And what are we to make of this idea that bounces in and out in the Bible, that God brings calamity and terrible effects into people's lives when they are not faithful, or when groups of people do not follow God's call to be a blessing in the earth, and instead they're curses. They're hateful. And does God then move against them, and does God punish people for their terrible behavior? Are nations punished? And are they punished directly? It's a question that comes up. Job throws a whole big wrench into the thoughts, the theological thoughts, and his story asks the question, does God punish people or allow people to suffer who don't deserve it? And I want to know what you think about that.
That's a question I've been asking recently. My husband's daughter-in-law, who is 50, and a very proactive woman in all kinds of charities and volunteer work and good deeds. Anyway, she has just been diagnosed with brain cancer, and she is going to undergo a 4-hour surgery at Johns Hopkins next Monday, and then period of radiation after that. And I think about her all the time, and I just wonder the same thing that you're talking about. Why? Why Lisa? I mean, she, she, if you want to say she does God's work, I mean, yeah. She thinks about other people. She's sensitive about their needs. So why? Why was she targeted? What a funny question to ask. But why? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And if we were to take it on and we were to read, as we've been reading, chapter and verse, before too long into it, you find Job has an interesting point of view. Job raises his fist to God and says, "You are punishing a man who does not deserve to be punished. You are torturing a person. You are bringing suffering into my life. A man, I do not deserve it. And yet you are doing it anyway." And I reread the beginning of the study Bible introduction to Job, and they show verses after verses where God seems to accept that, in fact, yes, God is causing suffering to happen in Job's life that he does not deserve. All right, I'm trying to get you started talking about this.
Well, I always say, why do I have to be blind? Why do I have to be crippled? Otherwise, I'm healthy. Why me? Then why not me?
Say some more about why not me.
Well, I mean, should I wish it on somebody else? No. It's my burden to bear.
So do you ever struggle with the thought, I hope not, but that you struggle with blindness and these other challenges in life because you've done something wrong?
Oh, well, I've probably done my share of wrong things.
That's not what I asked you. That's not what I asked you.
But no, I'm not shaking my fist at God. I just say, why not me? I mean, I'm just as good as the next person. I can deal with it.
Okay. Now that last comment, what?
Is God doing it? I don't believe God is doing it. And you said deserve. I have trouble with the word deserve. That there are a lot of people, I can't say don't deserve it or whatever. Deserve is a hard word for me because I really think that, well, first of all, I don't think God is pointing a finger and saying, you were bad, so I'm going to zap you or something. But where does grace come in with deserving things? Do people really deserve? I just think it happens, that it's not God doing it. But why does God allow it to happen is something I can question, certainly. But I don't think of God as, is it omnipotent? What's there were so many of those, omniscient, omnipotent. There were so many descriptions of God.
I want to read this paragraph from the introductory comments. This is called Clues for Interpretation of Job. The book of Job is perhaps the most sustained piece of theological writing in the whole Hebrew Bible. And it is unique in the Bible for its sympathetic portrayal of differing theological viewpoints. The theme of the book is often described as the problem of suffering, but it is rather that of the injustice of undeserved suffering. By the standards of his day, Job's suffering can only be a sign that he is a great sinner. Resisting that implication, this is the part that I think is outstanding. Job demands that God explain why he, Job, a righteous man, is being so badly treated. More than that, Job reasons that in his case it shows that God is not governing the world in justice. I want to read that again. Job reasons that in his case it proves that God is not governing the world in justice. He argues that the prosperity of the wicked and the suffering of the righteous in general are further evidence of God's neglect of justice. Woo!
Wow.
Woo! When God replies to Job, God speaks only of God's own designs in creating the universe and never mentions the issue of justice. No doubt implying that Job is right, that justice is not a primary divine concern. Now, I don't know if that smokes in your pipe the way it does in mine, but I'm going to tell you, I think it's outrageous that in the Bible itself, given the disparity, the unjust seem to have good lives sometimes, and the just seem to be deprived and hungry and poor and suffering in the world. In this case, they raise the prospect that Job illustrates that God doesn't care about justice.
Well, then the question arises, what does God care about then? And how does God govern, if not in justice?
I don't know the answer to that.
But it does pose the question, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think all of Job poses this question. And you'll hear preachers work it over. They somehow sense it intuitively that these kinds of claims are being made about God, which is an embarrassment to those of us who want to talk about the God of justice and the God who sent Abram and Sarah into the world to address the hurting of the world, and that God is very concerned about justice. Justice for the poor and justice for the unjustly treated and imprisoned, that God cares tremendously about this function of life. But I got excited when I read this, not because I agree with it, but I feel like I finally understand what Job is about. It's making a claim. Job is making a claim which I, A, have never entertained, and B, don't know what to do with it. Because I don't believe it. Now, I don't know about you, and again, I think all of you have at least read the beginning part of Job where, the Satan, the tempter, the tester, not the devil, comes to the court of God, and this is not an image of God that any of us learned in Sunday school.
No.
Because we learned that God is one, there's only one God, and yet in the beginning of Job, God holds court with almost like the Greek pantheon. And the gods, and I'm not making this up, the gods are assembled. The council is assembled in God's court. And they're having a discussion. And one of the dignitaries who sits in God's court is the tempter. And I've tried to work hard to help you to separate this theological claim from what the summaries, the superficial summaries that go on in a lot of Christian teaching today that says, oh, well, this is the devil. And this is the one who in the world is out opposing everything God wants to do, and we have to choose between following God or following the devil. That is not the theological premise of this book of Job. In this book of Job, a right function of God in heaven is to test human beings to see if they're faithful. That's considered to be a good and fair function of God. And that's carried out through whatever you want to call this one, an angel or a messenger or an ambassador, this tester that arrives and throws all kinds of ailments at Job is coming from the house of God. And God has agreed to step back and not protect Job, a righteous and faithful man, but that God has agreed to step back so that the tester can have his day with Job and prove that Job is only faithful to God because he has wealth and family and blessings in the world. And that's how it all begins. And it's a bet, by the way. It's a wager. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not anything like the God that I've been told about from Sunday school and in college and in seminary. That is not what God is like.
It also asks the question, what's the criteria being faithful?
Well, that's a good question. It seems as though the terms of the bet are that the tester, the trier from God, will make Job curse God. And if Job curses God, then the tester wins and God loses.
Okay. Right. Okay.
Now, my question is, what's the difference? So, in the story, Job does not. I mean, God wins the bet. And at least as it comes out, after great torment and great suffering, the death of his wife, the death of all of his kids, the death of all of his cattle, and his crops are burned, his skin is covered with lesions, he's choking to death, and his friends come around and torment him. I mean, you try to picture a man that's in worse shape, you won't find one. That's why it's so hard to read this book. It's really depressing. Job does not curse God, but Job accuses God of not caring about people who are treated unjustly. And I don't know about you, but in these great debates about, why do people suffer, whatever. This isn't why do they suffer. This is a question that goes right to the heart of God. Does God really care about injustice? And I think, I don't know what you would, I've been trained to say, of course God does. Right?
But what I'm thinking at this point and talking about your description of God withholding protection for Job, it makes you think, does God withhold protection from the rest of us when he wants?
Yeah, what are we? Are we just a sport?
Or not?
Yeah, are we just a sporting event in God's world? Is that what we are?
Well, are we all being tested? Or was that one angel or whatever he was, the tester? Is to be applied to all of us or just to Job?
Well, okay, so in order to answer that, my mind goes to the story of the children of Israel. They were liberated from slavery in big dramatic ways, and the rhetoric there is because God cares about injustice. So God hears the cries of the unjust treatment in Egypt, and God comes in the person of Moses, and knocks Pharaoh back a rung or two, and leads them out into the wilderness. And in the wilderness, the story of the wilderness is a 40-year-long story of the people being tested. They're tested, and they fail, by the way, every single time. They have a couple days where they don't have any water, and as soon as they're feeling parched and hungry, they start cursing God, and they start cursing Moses. And they fail. And then God says, man, you people don't understand me at all. I'm going to show you how powerful I am. And so God brings water to them. Where? Out of a well? No. God brings water to them out of a rock. The one place you would never expect for water to come, God says to Moses, take that stick you used to part the sea and wrap this big rock, and water is going to flow out of that rock. Right? So the people they're made to look like fools. And it goes on. They get hungry, they don't have a lot of food, and the food arrives from where? Do caravans come with camels carrying the food in? No. They get up in the morning and they find the food is spread across the land like dew. But they are tried, they are tested, they are put to the test, and they fail. I don't know what you do when the people...
God still protects them.
God does still protect them, yes. But they're tested, they're tried. And when God gets so sick of their complaining, this swarm of snakes comes and bites them, and just, you could... I'm not going to say God sent the snakes, they did. But the snakes come, and then they have to be saved. Now, that's a great big long story that life is about tests. And faith is going to be tested. If you're going to have faith, it's going to be tested. And then you go to Jesus, the story of Jesus. Jesus is baptized. Amazing things happen at his baptism. And what happens next? He's led out into the wilderness. By who? By the devil? No. He's led into the wilderness by the Spirit of God. And there, he is tested and tried. And I will argue until I'm finished with my ministry completely that it's important to know that even though the King James and others translate that it was the devil, a very Greek and dualism idea that it was the devil who tested Jesus in the wilderness, the Hebrew and the Greek do not support that. The language says, the tester came and tempted him. And the idea was, like, you have to pass, the bar exam in order to become a lawyer. You have to pass tests. We know this function. You have to be tested before you can be trusted. That's not a function of evil. So,
No.
Go ahead, what?
No, I said, no, it's not.
No, we don't see it as a function of evil.
No.
You leave. I saw a funny little one of those Zoom or loops where parents have two kids sitting at the table. They look like twins, and they put cupcake down in front of the kids, and they say, "Now don't touch this. You can eat this when I get back. Don't touch this." And the parents go out of the room, and the first thing you see, one kid looks at the other, and the other one looks back, and without any further ado, they both grab the cupcakes and eat them. And I go, yeah. The parents tested their kids to see if they would do what they told them to do when they were out of the room, and the answer is no. They would not. Now, so there's a part of me which understands that there's a theological claim that God is going to test Job. Job is a man of deep, abiding faith. But where it loses me entirely is the intensity. Alice used the phrase of God withdrew God's protection. I mean, about everything. Everything.
What is the test for?
Well, in a very sick and malignant way, I think the test is the contest between the tester and God. The tester, the Satan, says human beings will only have faith in you when their life is going well. And as soon as their life goes bad, they will abandon you, God. And their faithfulness and all their claims to faithfulness is a bunch of hooey. Because as soon as it gets tough, you will find out that there is no faith, real faith in human beings. Human beings' faith in God. It doesn't exist.
Now that you said that and talked a little about Jesus going into the desert and being tested, why does God feel the need to test Jesus if Jesus is of God, the Son of God, and of God? He's basically testing himself.
Yes. Yeah.
Why did, what was the need? What was the purpose?
Yeah. I don't know. And I think that the Christian theology, which makes Jesus and God one, it lends itself to what you just said. This was God testing God's self. In the telling of the story of Jesus, I mean, the heavens open up, and the voice of God comes just prior to the wilderness. Jesus is baptized, and the voice comes from heaven and says, "This is my beloved child. This is my son." Now, in Christian theology, from the 14th, 15th, and 16th century, we have made a very big deal out of that language. But what we miss sometimes is, and I'm not saying that I don't accept the Trinity and all that, I'm just saying be careful, because being called the Son of God was not unique to Jesus. It was not. And in fact, being referred to as the Son of God was a very common thing in the culture, especially of the Romans, because the emperor was called the Son of God. Every emperor that came along was called the Son of God. And so when the voice from heaven says, "This is my son, this is my child, in whom I am well pleased," if you listen carefully, that doesn't sound like God talking to God's self. And therefore, a lot of the debates about what was the Trinity, how did the Trinity work, can you find the Trinity in the Bible, it starts a whole big deal. Where do you find the Trinity? You find the doctrine of the Trinity in the theological acclamations from 300 years after Jesus lived, died, and was resurrected. Now, what was happening in the wilderness when Jesus was being tested? I mean, if you can, without feeling like you're being a heretic, if you can think of the humanity of Jesus, don't forget that the Trinity doctrine always said you can never consider the divinity of Jesus without considering the humanity of Jesus. So I know it might sound like doublespeak because that's really what it is. But the testing of the tester in the wilderness of Jesus was considered to be a legitimate function of God putting Jesus to the test. And I think the record would show that the witness of Jesus in the wilderness is the one and only place in the Bible's conversation about human beings and their faithfulness. Jesus is the only human being who ever passed the test. Everybody else. I mean, we've read 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Read the story of kings as they try to handle power. Read any of these people, whether it's an individual or whether it's a group of people who rise to the top and have some power, and look at what happens in their relationship of being people who are faithful to God. It just disappears. And all of a sudden they're as immoral and unfaithful as any other human being that ever lived on the earth. So, but Job says, God, I'm looking at my own life, and I'm being honest. I know what I'm talking about. I haven't violated your covenants. I haven't turned against you. I've trusted you in all the things of my life. He doesn't say that the riches of his life have come to him because of his faith. He just says, I have never, ever doubted you. Ever. And then all the stuff is gone. And then Job says some pretty startling things about God. God, I don't even know that you care. It's not, to Colette's thing of, why am I blind? In Job's world, Job would say, you're blind because God doesn't care whether you're blind or whether you see. Now, I don't know. You ever heard that from a Bible study before?
Well, maybe God sent Jesus down because he didn't know what it was like to be a human being.
Okay, now you're talking my language.
I've been listening to you for a long time.
I know. But you see, okay, so Barbara was talking before about how we have these hymns that talk about God as all-powerful, all-knowing, all the great superlatives about God, right? But what you just said, Colette, and I'm going to deny that I ever gave you those ideas, but you raised the specter that there may be some things that God doesn't know. And you see, I'm more willing than most of my seminary professors. I'm not alone in this in Christian theology today, but I am much more willing to believe that God especially because, I'll take you back to the Garden of Eden. I'm just going to jump to the point that Eve says to God, "You have no idea what it's like to be a human being. You don't know." And God seems contrite. Because, we have the story of them being thrown out of the garden, but don't forget, they were naked and ashamed, and you know who got out the sewing machine and made them clothes? God did. God made clothes for them. And as they're leaving the garden, God promises to protect them. And so I still make the case that Eve says to God, "You did this. You put the serpent, you made the created order like this, that it would test us to the point that we would fail." To me, that's what the serpent is. The serpent is the most beautiful of all the creatures in the garden. And life. The serpent represents life. And life brings with it the test. And, some people know what I mean by that right away. And some people don't know what I mean by it. People who have been through trials, who have been through tests, who've been accused of crimes they didn't commit and going to jail, who have suffered beyond human reason, disease after disease, and no cure in sight. This is what Eve says to God. "You put the serpent in the garden. You made life this way. And now you want to come around and hold us accountable because we couldn't hold up? What? No." And as the story continues, it seems to me you don't really hear from God again until, there's a couple other creation stories that seem to tell the same thing. The mountain, why can't I think of the big mountain, or the Tower of Babel. Tower of Babel, human beings are trying to do the best they can to cope with life, and they're trying to do the best they can to cope with what comes along, and they decide, we can't live in the earth this way. We got to get up. We got to get up where we can see what's really going on. We got to have more control in this life. And God comes along and mixes their languages up so they can't finish the tower, and they can't talk to each other anymore, so they spread out. We can't do this, God. And then you have the story of Noah, another, in my view, another creation story, another what is the world really like. And the story of Noah starts out with the facts. Every human being is doing what they feel is right in their own eyes. It's a mess. It's just like the chaos before God said, "Let there be light." There was no light in Noah's day. Everybody's doing whatever they thought was right in their own eyes. And God says, "Oh my gosh, I got to do this over again." So all those people are wiped out. And I've said this before. I've said enough things that, in the olden days would get the Spanish Inquisition in here and drag me out. But in the end, God's idea about how to fix the problem is a disaster. Because Noah and his family are no better than the people that were drowned in the flood. And I get it. Noah was trapped with his family for 40 days and 40 nights on the worst cruise ship you'd ever want to be on, shoveling manure. I get it. He comes off that boat, goes down the ramp. He's got a bag of grape seeds, and the first thing he does is plant a vineyard and then lays by the vineyard every day. Some of you know where I'm going with this. He lays by that vineyard every day, nurturing that vine to come up because he forgot to bring wine with him on the ship. And as soon as the grapes are ripe, he squeezes them, He lets them ferment, and he gets falling down, go to sleep, knockout drunk. And while he's drunk, he gets naked, and he exposes himself to the young boys in his family. Yeah. Aren't you glad all the bad people are gone? And again, to me, the message is, God, you have no idea. This is not the all-knowing God who does everything right. I mean, jump in and interrupt me when you hear me say something that you think is ridiculous. So, what happens next? The most important step that God could ever take. God calls to Abram and Sarah. Two people. Just like there was Eve and Adam, now there are two people. And this time, instead of testing them and trying them and having them fail over and over again, God comes alongside them and says, I have a suggestion. My suggestion is that you two could be a source of blessing in this broken world. I see that it's really broken. And maybe the only thing that's ultimately going to help is not more rules or laws or anything like that, but if you two would promise to take whatever blessings you get in this life and share them and assist the families of the earth, I think we can begin to actually not test faith, but we could begin to build faith. We could begin to build trust among the human family if there were people who lived to be a blessing to all the families of the earth.
Well, that part of the story I agree with. The story of humanity on earth. It's our purpose, I think, is right in that story. We're here to be a blessing to one another, to help one another in times of adversity, because the world is chaos.
Yes.
We can't control it. Bad things happen, earthquakes happen, wars happen. But the way we're tested is if we can, I think, bear these things with patience and be there for one another. Not abandon one another, but try to be a blessing in whatever adversity your neighbor, your family are facing, then that's the best we can do as human beings. And I do believe in the afterlife, so I think the justice may come then. In Islam, this world is really not the be-all, end-all. This is the dunya. This is the place of tests, the place of adversity, but also the place where we can develop a sense of empathy and graciousness to one another so that in the hereafter, we can continue that. I don't know. I don't like to comment on Job because I really don't understand it.
Right.
I do not. I don't think I ever will. No, whatever version I read, the explanation for it in Judaism and Christianity or Islam, I still don't understand it.
Yeah, and I'm owning up to that too. Like this commentator's comment that Job says, the God that is pulling off this bet and carrying out this kind of treatment towards a faithful human being doesn't care about suffering or injustice. That the suffering cannot possibly be a response to injustice, because he says to God, I'm not it. I am not your unjust person. And you are throwing, through this bet you've made with the tester, you're throwing all rational thought about how to make sense out of life. You're throwing it out the window. It doesn't make any sense at all. And I don't care. I mean, it's interesting in the telling of the story that what's supposed to make us all feel better is that, you know, Job's wife was dead, his kids were dead, and so what's he get? He gets a new wife, and he gets new kids.
Well, in Islam, actually, he gets the same wife and kids back. Everything's restored the way it was.
Wow.
So that's at least a little bit.
At least that I could go for. But that is not what happens in this story.
But it's not in the Bible, I know.
Nope. In the Bible, it's, you know, he gets a different herd of cattle and a whole different set of sheep. And,
Right.
you know, his skin is restored. But, I mean, yeah, he's happy with his new wife. I don't get it. But I
Is
do.
your wife in the room?
Yeah, right.
Your wife in the room, is that why you're saying that?
Yes. No, she might be listening online though. Like, yeah, I just, you know, I just try. The commentator here says that Job holds almost like a juggler several different theological ideas. Several of them are held out there. And so it's different than some, like this is not the way Paul writes in the New Testament at all, dogmatic and telling you how it works. This is a poem. The Job in the Christian Bible is put as the first book of the poetic books. It's a poem, it's poetic. But in its poetry, it does not, it's chaotic itself. You know, and Debbie, you talked about the fact that, you know, life is chaos. I think the biblical witness is that God saw the world in chaos and then spoke the order of love and creativity, and all the things, the water and the land were separated and the systems evolved. What I prefer is to say, it's broken. It's broken. It is not perfect at all. Far, far from it, because injustice is real, persecution is real, people suffer for no reason at all. I don't believe in the ultimate rationality of what happens in the world. I don't. Some things are rational, some things make sense. I'm happy for them, but it's broken. And again, my own particular, not just my view of Eve and Adam and of Moses and his relationship to God, this theme that might sound radical comes out. Moses gets to the top of the mountain and curses God and says, you get mad when you have no reason to get mad. God says, I'm going to kill all these people and wipe them off the face of the earth because they built the calf, the golden calf. And Moses says, if you do that, you're going to be on the headlines of the New York Times tomorrow as the stupidest God in the world. I mean, and that's, I know it sounds exaggerated, but that is what Moses says. Moses is saying to God, you don't get it. And I halfway wonder if God's feelings got hurt, which is why Moses was never allowed to enter the promised land. And it is not clear in the text why Moses was denied the promised land. Because at one point, I think it was maybe the issue of the water, I think it was, at Meribah, where Moses crosses the line, and God is saying, what is wrong with these people? I rescued them from Egypt. I gave them food. And Moses says, you don't know what it's like to go without water. Do you have any idea, God, what it is like to be dying of thirst? And you're going to be hard on this people? You're going to be mad at them? And then God says, oh, pick up your stick and hit the rock, Moses. Like, I'd love to write an informal dialogue of the story of the Bible, you know. But, you know, and this story is there.
But aren't we all like Moses, don't we get to a point where we say, no matter how patient, no matter how faithful, there comes a point in life where you say, why? Why me? Like Judy said, why her family member? Why? What did they do? And we're all human, and that is part of being human.
Yeah.
Is questioning why things happen. And the worst part of it is sometimes there's no good explanation for any of it, which is why I really don't like Job.
You know, it occurs to me,
Depressing.
I think I've said this once before, but, you know, I grew up in the Assemblies of God church. And in the Assemblies of God church, their faith, I'm going to say this and you'll figure out what I mean by it later. Their faith goes way beyond any faith that I have ever witnessed in the Presbyterian church. And here's what I mean. In the Assemblies of God church, when we got together on Sunday nights, that was the healing services, right? And that's when people like Colette, who are struggling with blindness, would come to church. Nobody in the room asked, why is she blind? Nobody. You know what they did? They got together at the front of the church by the altar, and the pastor put hands on the person who was blind, and then proceeded to order Jesus to heal her. I mean, order him. And that was in that tradition, that Pentecostal tradition, that is the definition of faith. When you are bold enough to command God, and you don't sit around and ask, why is my friend hurting, or why is this happening? You got together in a prayer, and sometimes they prayed for 2 or 3 hours in their demand to Jesus. I don't know if you've ever seen any of these televangelists that heal and do these kinds of services, but that's not Presbyterian theology, because they do not take up a plaintive attitude towards God. They don't get together and get on their knees and cry out, why, God? Oh, why have you allowed this to happen? No. Nope. They believe that God has called upon the faithful to have so much faith that they tell God what to do about it.
Well, isn't that do not tempt the Lord your God? I mean,
Yeah, I suppose so. I don't think they would see it that way. They would say, no. You can look
yeah,
in...
I'm sure they don't see it that
No,
way.
I
But
know.
I kind of do. Yeah.
But, you know...
Because what happens when somebody isn't miraculously healed?
Oh, they never are.
Well, then what does that do to your faith and
Nothing.
and your relationship to God? I mean,
Nothing.
That's weird.
You just look up at the clock and realize it's time to go home. I mean, seriously. You don't carry the thinking through. It just feels so good. I'm telling you. You know, by this time I was probably 10 or 12 years old. I didn't believe any of it. I never believed any of it. I told my parents, you brought the wrong child home from the hospital. I don't fit in. My sisters and brothers were talking and speaking in tongues, and they're praying in the front of the church, and I'm standing in the back with my arms folded going, I don't know, what is wrong with these people? You know, I mean, honestly, I'm telling you, this is the truth. But the thing is, they would pray, and my father had, every now and then I would go up and look at it. He had a jar of oil. It was olive oil, which was supposed to have come from the Middle East. And when they're really praying what they call the unction of God is they believe that by faith they are called upon to anoint the person that is sick, and in the anointing power of Jesus, by the power of Jesus' name, God, on behalf of Jesus, we command you to heal this person. Now, the trick is, well, we didn't say when. No, we didn't say when. And sometimes when they gathered next week, person who had been prayed for the week before would stand up and give their testimony to the miracle that had happened during the week, because they went to the eye doctor, and the eye doctor said, the doctor cannot explain it, but I can see better than I ever could before. And that's kind of a regular ritual, of, and nobody questioned it. Nobody questioned it.
Maybe the miracle is that it makes everybody feel better, and it brings everybody together in faith.
Well,
however you express
yep.
it, however you express it.
And the other thing that it does is, a lot of times if you're struggling with blindness, or you have, cancer in your leg, or you have an illness, in the culture we live in, you get isolated. Whether people intend to do it or not, you get isolated. And sometimes we isolate, we go on our own. So you're right, Debbie, that one of the powerful, really powerful experiences of those things is when someone comes to church and they own up to the ailment that is going on in their lives, and all of a sudden, there's 70 people in the room, and 70 people are laying hands on you and praying for you. Mm-hmm. When does that happen in our lives? When? Whether you believe in the miraculous or not, I do believe in the miracle of the power of community coming together to help people to cope with what happens in life. So,
Go.
I'll
That's the mission of Ibrahim and Sarah, right?
That's exactly right. They bring a blessing. And I think that the evangelical Pentecostal church goes too far, and it makes claims about their own power to be, healing people who are lame, and that they can walk in the next 5 seconds. I think is not it. But think about what I'm saying, that the faith they have is stop standing around and asking God to bring some fairness or healing into the world. Do it. And social justice people, in a way, have the same kind of approach. They get their signs, they write on the signs what they want. What do you want? We want control of the police. What do you want? We want control of the police. They're not bashful. They're not going to church and saying to God, why are we subjected to police brutality? They don't do that. They organize. They demand change. And that sounds to me a lot like the kind of faith, crazy as I thought it was, that was part of the charismatic church. Now, you can't all be quiet now, because I've said enough for you to respond to one way or the other. You got. I know you're hearing me. I don't know what you're thinking of what I'm saying, but.
Oh boy.
I just think it takes a lot of nerve, a lot of what? Like, it takes a lot to demand something of God.
Yes, it does.
And that's kind of a hard thing to do, because I find myself on the pleading side more so as the do this or else kind of
yes. I'm with you, and I agree, and I that's why I followed in the path of the spiritual tradition of the Reformed Church and the Presbyterian Church, because we're a lot about pleading. We are. Our prayers are pleading. They're never demanding. Never.
It leaves us with a whole lot of questions too, and direction, and actions. So.
Well, Walter Brueggemann says that as you read through the Psalms, you'll discover a dynamic of faith in the Hebrew tradition which we do not recognize. And you have to look carefully for it, but you'll see it. If you want to go back and start reading it, you will see it. When we get to the Psalms, you'll hear it. Brueggemann says that the psalmist believes that sometimes you have to wake up heaven. You have to literally wake God up and say to God, Do you see what's happening down here? And it may not ring a bell for Psalms that you're not familiar with, but when you start to read through the Psalms, you will hear the psalmist saying, "Awake, God, awake." Do you understand how bad it's getting down here? And Brueggemann has I love the man. I respect him as like one of the most knowledgeable Hebrew interpreters in the world. And he says we miss something about Hebrew faith when we miss the fact that sometimes you have to blow the trumpet and you have to wake God up to what's happening in your life. Now,
isn't that what Moses did when he told them that you don't understand what it's like to be human?
I think Moses is a perfect example of it. And when God's response is, "I'm going to kill them all," like, you want to be offended by the theology in Job? Well, go back to Moses and God and be offended by God's threat to murder them all. Like, seriously.
But whenever I read something like that, I think either someone didn't translate it properly or someone put words in God's mouth. And I can't see that that's what God would say.
Well,
And a lot of I think of must be metaphor. And I can't figure out the metaphor, but it can't really be real stuff.
Well, I think I'm with you on a lot of that, especially with you when it comes to these kings who tell me what God is saying and all the rest of it. But I have to say, I've talked about this before, I like the humanity of God, which is in the early part of the Old Testament. I like the humanity of it. That God, we are created in God's image is the claim, but we forget that, what is the difference between the way humans experience the world and the way God experiences the world? In classical theology, we have made God the wholly other, as if God is nothing like us. Nothing at all. The classic theologians made sure that your and my thoughts about God would be very much like the Greeks' thoughts about God. The Hebrews, I always say, the Hebrews had dirt under their fingernails. They're earthy people. They lived more in the rhythm of nature and of life. Their God was not so sterile. Their God, the God of the Old Testament, the God of the Bible, is much more engaged in life, in both its good parts and its bad parts. And the God of Moses, the God of the time of Moses, is able to feel jealousy, is able to experience disappointment, and is not removed from the human experience. The trouble for us is, as we go back and we try to read the Hebrew Bible, we are totally influenced by the Greek, the Roman ideas of the pantheon and, the whole systematic idea about God. And a lot of the theology that emerged out of the 4th, 5th, and 6th century explaining who God is didn't come from the Bible. It came from logic. It came from philosophy and rational thought about who God is. And God, that big argument, can God make a rock so big that God can't pick it up? Well, then, you've heard that one, right? I mean, that big struggle. If God can do anything, can God make a rock so big God can't pick it up? Hebrew people never got into those kinds of thoughts. They never went there. God was much more earth and wind and fire and life and right in the trenches with them than some abstract idea of God who is perfect love or perfect grace or perfect, harmony. God is much more earthy. In a way, in some ways, very much like Jesus related to God.
Well, if you don't believe in the Trinity, you can see how human beings try to relate to God in Jesus's example. But what if the story of Job actually represents the inability of human beings to ever understand God and to ever understand fully what a complete relationship with God is? Maybe we're not ever meant to understand that. And as you usually say, the Bible shows us more about humanity, how people are. We really don't get a full picture of what God is like. We're looking, what do they say, through the glass darkly?
Right.
And that is probably the most frustrating thing for human beings, to know that you may never know the true nature of God, and there are things that we're never going to understand.
Yeah.
That's why Job is frustrating. It's
Right.
a frustrating book.
Do you like this book,
It's
Debbie?
Great. God is a mystery. And
Well-
that's why, but we want an answer for everything. And we
Absolutely.
want an explanation for everything.
And I think that's the commentator here is saying, so it's important to know there isn't just one answer or one theological solution that is given to you in Job. There are 4 or 5 that are held forth with some power. And you can go, okay, well, maybe that's the way it is. Or what if it's this way? Or what if it's this way? And in the end, yes, it is frustrating. And gives cause for people to say, I don't like this book.
But it's a challenge as well. So even though I find it perplexing, that perhaps, and I don't like spending time on Job. We've read this through before, and it's never rewarding to me. But maybe in the sense that you keep going at it, you find out more about each other
Right.
and ourselves every time you read it. And maybe that's the best we can glean from it.
Just,
Yeah,
yeah.
I could accept that. I can, which is why I don't want to start reading chapter and verse in it. I mean, for me, the experience the last time that we went through it was, quite honestly, I mean, after you get past the first 4 or 5 chapters where the narrative is story and his friends show up and, and you hear, I hear the logic that a lot of people apply, that I've talked about being in churches where, somebody would get sick and then a group of people would decide that their sickness is because they've done something wrong. I mean, I've been in congregations where there are groups of people who actually think that way.
Right. Anyway.
They just, in one Bible study, I had one woman who thought of herself as an expert in Bible, interpretation. She came to the Bible study, and she told me that I was completely wrong, that Job is never exonerated as a righteous person. That, she said, that's not what the text says. And that Job suffered, he got leprosy, and he did all this because he was indeed an unfaithful person. And then
Well, I don't think she read that then.
I
right?
don't
No,
think she did either. I don't either.
If there are any facts at all in this story, that's one of them, that he is a righteous man.
He's a righteous man. And she took it as if that was sarcastic, So, yeah, you can interpret this 1,000 different ways. I think that one should be off the table. I don't think you can do that. But the reason that it was important to her was because as a member in that church, and it was a fairly big church, she was a pain in the ass. She was. Because she would approach people under the guise of trying to be supportive and helpful. And, you know how it is. I don't know if you've ever interacted when a person who smokes a lot finally is able to quit, and how they treat people who are still smoking. She was like that. She was like, and she believed when you got a cold, when you got a stomach virus, anything, any physical ailment that you had was clearly the result of an unresolved sin that was in your life, and you needed to confess it, and if you would confess it, you would immediately get better.
Ouch.
Yeah, so I don't, Colette, it makes me worry about you. I don't know what you did was so wrong, but it must have been really bad.
Oh,
I'm kidding, Colette. You know that, right?
where is she?
I'm here.
Yeah, she's there. So,
Oh,
well, I think my hopes about what we might do with Job are done. And if you want, if you want to,
really?
if you
Are
want,
we not going to read it?
no,
Oh, good.
no.
The challenge is gone. I was going to say I'm getting lucky because Ramadan is coming in a couple of weeks, and I wouldn't be with you anyway to hear all the hardship. So good.
I mean, really,
You want to suffer through it. Plus, you don't have to.
it got so bad the last time we tried to wade through this. It got so bad. I was starting to fake it and being sick, not coming to Bible study because I couldn't go through one more wave of it. And it's like, okay, you made your point. You made your point. Let's get on with it.
Yeah.
And I kept waiting, for the tide to turn and for Job to finally have something. No. Another 3 chapters about his suffering and his friends. And oh my gosh. If you're feeling depressed, don't ever read Job. Because you will.
Sounds like you were suffering with Job.
I was suffering with Job about the story of Job. And
I know you were suffering.
yeah.
Just as Job was suffering, you were suffering as well.
And I'd say to God, why? Why must I do this? Why did I suggest reading this book? So, I'm going to suggest then that next week that we turn to the book of Psalms. And we start to, really, to me, you can take a bath in the book of Psalms, and it's just fabulous. So the opposite of Job, the poetry of the book of Psalms, and is so inspiring and uplifting and encouraging. I think the time is right for it. So,
Sounds good.
sound good?
Relief.
Yes, relief. Okay, I'm going to say thank you for coming tonight then, and you might actually, if you feel motivated, start reading Psalms. There's a lot to glean from it, and some of it you'll get on your own, or you might find a commentary to guide you through it. There's wonderful help books that will help you to see it, and then we can come together and combine our thoughts together on it. Okay?
I have one question to you.
Yes?
I keep seeing, right now, I'm seeing a man in a yellow shirt and a black jacket.
It's not a man.
It's not a
me,
man.
Colette.
Yeah, it's Melinda. Right. She was sitting.
I thought it was a figment of my imagination. Because
I'm real. I'm really quiet today, but I'm real.
Yeah, and
okay.
and you have a focus thing in your background, and so when you're sitting back, you're just out of focus enough that
Oh,
I
I'm
actually.
in my office, but I'm connected with my phone because my iPad wasn't charged,
Yeah.
and I didn't want to hold it because then I'd probably get you dizzy. So I just put it in my computer, and that's why I'm sitting down like this, so that I can see because I don't have a stand. So
You're blurry, but
Yeah, I think you have a blurred background.
you're definitely feminine. Please.
Yes, I know.
but it was like fuzzy, and I thought, is that God?
Ah! Man, God is listening in. God's
Paulette, do you really
right.
think God is male?
Well,
But you
I guess
tell
you can be wrong. That's the key. You can be wrong. God, but wow, can you imagine? Colette was thinking God was listening, then I'm in big trouble.
Yeah.
All right, my friends, thank you very much. Appreciate your
you.
engagement and your listening and caring. So I'll see you all next week.
See you next week.
All right.
Good
Good night
week,
now.
everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
And good night and goodbye to those of you who've been listening online. I will.